This is a fucking stupid tweet. Why do these feminists think that when men face issues, it's just because men are toxic? You need sympathy for males and understanding of male issues, but if you only talk about how toxic they are, then you're not going to fulfill that, are you? When there's economic downturn, for example, which results in increased unemployment, there is a link between that and suicide. A study by the National Library of Medicine found that for every 1% increase in unemployment, there is a 0.79% increase in the suicide rate. This tweet was made after this happened.
Rishi Sunak urged to appoint Minister for Men, suggested by a Conservative MP. New role would champion issues such as reducing male suicide. Would that be something you'd be in favour of?
Well, what's interesting about that is the hostility it sometimes faces whenever it comes up. I saw a programme where there was like a feminist academic and a Lib Dem MP, and they were so hostile to this idea. And I thought, if you flipped those things, i.e. that it's the biggest cause of death for men under 50 is suicide, men are less likely to go to the doctors, men are less likely to maintain friendships. If that was for women, we'd often look at, well, why is society making that happen? Whereas with men, the argument is often, why are they doing that to themselves? So I'm not totally wedded to the idea, but the hostility towards the idea, I find it instructive.
Ava?
I think that it feeds into the culture a little bit, this Minister for Men argument. In my mind, I think there should be a Minister for Mental Health, which would be all-encompassing. I mean, you've got something like 7 million children waiting for prescriptions for mental health at the moment. It's a crisis that's endemic throughout the country, not specific to men. And I think, a lot of ministers kind of bandy this about to sort of, I'm sorry, but make an enemy out of women. I think, not you, and I don't think your book is. I don't
accept that. I don't think it is to make an enemy. If we looked at during COVID, men were literally more likely to die from COVID. And I don't really want to cast myself as a meninist or one of these guys from the manosphere, because that's not who I am. But I do find it interesting that sometimes the arguments tend to throw it back.
But who was doing all the work during COVID? A lot of the time, if you looked into people's households, it was the women who were taking on the laundry, the school care, all of that.
I'm not disputing any of that. What I'm saying that there are specific issues that men face that might warrant specific attention. I mean, literally, the biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide. That is an arresting statistic. And if that doesn't warrant specific attention, mental health is an umbrella issue.
I have to say that is also because women are unsuccessful. That is a lot of that feeds into that statistic.
But it feels like, it just doesn't feel like you've got any space for this idea that men might have unique challenges that face them. And the problem is, even as I'm saying this, in my mind, it's like I've got out the violin and I don't want to be.
Read the book.
I don't want to be this guy, because that's part of the problem. Is because you're encouraged on one level is men need to talk about their problems more, and then the moment you do it, you're like, all right, but not quite so often and not quite so loud. So like you say, the book is more light-hearted than that, but it certainly goes around these issues.
Francis?
This was bollocks. We have a Minister for Women in this country, and how many men do you see saying that having a Minister for Women is trying to make an enemy of men? This was full of whataboutism. We were talking about male suicide, but what about the laundry though? We need to look at why. Why are men more likely to succeed in suicide attempts? Men choose more violent methods. Why? Why is that? Because they are violent methods, it means they are more likely to be completed before anyone can intervene. In the United States, 6 in 10 gun owners are men, and firearms account for more than half of suicides, and many men choose these methods because they are more intent on it. The British Journal of Psychiatry found that men had higher levels of suicidal intent than women.
I think it's about this issue. I've got a brother, a son, nephews, Paul Novak, one of my best mates, who's leading the TUC. When you look at masculinity, it sort of feels like boys are still brought up. You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to talk about your feelings. You've got to put on this bravado. And I think that has to change. But I also think that we have to change the fact that women still earn 15% less than men.
But no one's saying you can't do both.
No, exactly.
We can multitask.
Exactly.
Can you multitask?
Well, not me personally, obviously. But I'm saying that. But I don't think those are reasons to not address these problems.
No, I agree.
Francis.
But most women experience sexual harassment.
I totally accept that. I don't understand why. But it's happening again with this conversation where I'm talking about the specific issues that men face, and you're quoting other issues which I do not contest on any level.
Here's a proposal.
I'm seeming very chippy now, aren't I? I didn't expect it.
Why don't you launch BASH? Blokes Against Sexual Harassment.
Well, I'm totally against sexual harassment, of course I am.
But do something to support women, stand by women who are facing that. In the way that women stand by men, you stand by women, and I think we could.
Well, I do think this discussion has already been interesting. I spoke about I've mentioned the suicide stat several times, and we've ended up discussing other things which are completely valid, certainly in terms of my industry, and I understand why those discussions are live discussions. But the idea that we can't have both those discussions, I genuinely find that odd,
Nobody said we
Francis.
couldn't.
Is this discussion
and then it was
being
shut down.
squeezed out? Is there not enough space for this as well?
Well, it slightly feels, I'd rather agree with Jeff. I'm fascinated listening to this discussion that at the first hint of men saying maybe, we need a bit of attention, it's, women have been oppressed throughout the ages, which is true. But it must be the case that if there are specific male problems or problems that only affect men, then we should try and deal with them at the same time as dealing with the specific issues that affect women.
What would you
task
think
the Minister for Men
sexism
was
is
doing?
ultimately bad for men too? Sexual harassment is ultimately bad for men too. And decent men need to stand up and say so. And I think we could have better lives together.
The problems in my industry, I'm happy to stand and say, that in comedy there are specific problems in and
because there
around
is
this
a power
area.
imbalance.
But that's what, and I've had that
that
discussion on my podcast and elsewhere. I'm happy to say that as many times as people want me to say it. But just in this small section of the show, I thought we were going to just mention about some of the specific problems that men face. Men were more likely to die from COVID. If that had been flipped, we would have looked at why is this? This is a tragedy. We'd have looked at all the underlying reasons. But it just wasn't really a discussion. And I'm just interested in why it wasn't a discussion.
Well, that'll be for the next show.
Yes, the book is more light-hearted than this discussion.
All right.
I just made that point.
That's all we have time for. But thank you to all of my guests. And
Francis has said men need to talk more, but when you have a segment specifically about men's issues and Jeff gets shut down and you resort to whataboutism and saying, have you considered telling men rape is bad in response to male suicide, how is that going to change things with suicidal men and women who are victims of rape? And also you have Ava diminishing it by mentioning laundry. How is that going to help men open up more? It's the feminist equivalent of All Lives Matter. We should look at issues that women face, yes, but this segment was supposed to be about men's issues, and talking about men's issues doesn't mean you don't care about women's issues. It's not mutually exclusive. Being dismissive enables people like Andrew Tate. Look at the language Tate uses, how he talks about males. The media being dismissive while Tate using the language that he does can lead to vulnerable men and boys to his content. Ava made other comments before, like on Piers Morgan's show.
It's hard enough being a young teenager, working out how things are, working out how to do dating and all of that, without the terror that if you touch in the wrong place at the wrong time, you may find that your whole life is destroyed.
See, I
and there
like
is
that
far
terror.
too much. Well,
I like that.
As a mother of a teenage boy, I don't like that
That's
terror.
the most
I do.
malicious thing I've ever heard.
That is
I
awful.
think that men should be frightened
I think
to
you'd
touch
feel
women in a way
differently
that
if you
they're
were,
not comfortable with.
But we're talking about
Yeah, but
teenage
we're not talking
years,
about.
children.
We're not talking about.
We're talking about
it's an
young
interesting thing
children.
that you see. I would say that attitude actually is part of the problem too.
It is.
That's to me toxic femininity.
It is.
That is saying you should all be terrified, you men, if you put one.
Of assaulting.
Well, I think we all understand what sexual
What is
assault
an
is.
assault?
What Isabel's talking about is that young teenage clumsiness
really
in many
hard.
cases, which is now being recategorised as assault. Is that a problem?
It's not being recategorised as assault. It's always been assault. It's just we're finally talking about it.
I don't agree with that.
That's
But
ridiculous.
Teenage boy fumbling with
touch
teenage
on the
girl
knee.
is not,
Not
is
even
not
that.
in most cases assault, is
Do
it?
you remember Aziz Ansari, right? Half the heels of Me Too, half the heels of Harvey Weinstein rightly being dragged through the courts, and he should have got way worse than just prison time, in my opinion. Aziz Ansari had a consensual relationship with a woman. She felt a bit awkward, and afterwards rescinded consent, and he was lumped in, and he had his
No,
career
I'm with you on that
largely
one.
cancelled.
I'm with
so
you.
then why should men be afraid of that?
Because he didn't touch her without consent, did he?
No, but she
But
rescinded his consent, and
how are
she
young
saw
boys
that then
supposed to
as the same
navigate
thing.
this, the whole
Yeah, I
thing?
agree.
I'm thinking
Well, you
of
need
my
to have-
teenage son. He's 14, 15. What's he supposed to say? Would you mind if I put
Isabel,
my
you are an
hand-
extremely
I mean, come
strong
on,
woman. I
come
know
on.
in your house you're teaching them the difference between assault and then
Of
coming on
course,
to
of
someone.
course. But
I know you are.
But what we're talking about is it's been very interesting watching the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, how it's all developed. Because a lot of very bad people, Harvey Weinstein and others, got their due comeuppance. We can all agree with that.
Yeah.
This is not even something to be debated. We're really talking about the grey line, right? Where is that grey line?
Yeah.
How do you navigate it? When you're an experienced adult and you've been around the block in many ways, you can navigate that much more intelligently and with emotional intelligence than you can if you're a teenage boy. And I think the point Isabel makes is a good one. I've had 3 sons in their 20s. I've always taught them to be respectful to women, and I believe they are. But I do think it's really hard for a 16, 17-year-old boy now in this environment to know even how to
They are all
having
terrified.
some kind of physical relationship with a woman.
Those good boys are all terrified. I know that from talking to my son. He's just like, I'm just not going there. Is that healthy?
Yes, I think it is, actually. I think it's better to not have a physical relationship than to have one that could ruin a woman's life.
But then how do they ever start?
Well, don't. If you're not 100%
Don't.
sure,
What? Are we going
don't.
for-
What are you going to have, a bunch of neutered boys who
But
never
it's
had...
so obvious.
We actually
How is that healthy? Population ageing is a big issue, so how is people deciding to not even try relationships sustainable? Benji tries and throws Connor and his mates into the same bracket as sex offenders. With the grey line, you don't know when to hug, for example. Here's another one.
Like she's the epitome of a self-obsessed, over-consumed, drinks too much woman who is not fit for the workplace. And I don't think that's healthy for young boys to look at.
Why do we worry about... are young boys consuming Bridget Jones books and films?
Young boys are consuming Andrew Tate, right? And Andrew Tate is teaching them that women are flighty, that women are not responsible and they should be in the home.
Oh, I see. So Bridget Jones paved the way for Andrew Tate.
Well, OK, well, possibly, actually.
Blimey.
But, you know, if a young boy is looking at her now, I would say that it just epitomises every critique that he has about a woman.
Adele.
I don't think that's the debate, is it? The debate is she a danger to women? Of course she's not a danger to women, because women are not weak-minded and ridiculous and read a comedic, satirical book and think, oh, that's who I am. I read American Psycho at the same time, which I presume young boys have also read. I did not start chopping people up and hiding them under my floorboards. It's fiction.
Andrew Tate isn't a good role model for males. He has said that clinical depression isn't real and that men who commit suicide leaving behind a family are not real men, which isn't helpful.
We're past the watershed, so I can say this. Show me a single self-respecting man that would like to climb into bed with that woman, ever, who wasn't an incel, who wasn't a cucked little incel. That little woman has been fed, spoon-fed oppression day after day after day after day, starting with the lie of the gender wage gap. And she sat there and I'm going like, if I met you in a bar and that was like sentence 3, chances of me just walking away are just huge. We need powerful, strong, amazing women who make great points for themselves. We don't need these sort of feminist 4.0. They're pathetic and embarrassing. Who'd want to shag that?
Look, Laurence Fox did have a point. What self-respecting man would want to be with someone who diminishes male issues? And the same would apply the other way around. But it was wrong of him to say it on a news channel. Obviously, there is a difference between making his comments on a news channel and making them on social media, but Ava really is milking it though, considering she has made comments like that herself. Laurence Fox and Dan Wootton, the host, have been suspended by GB News, and Laurence is criticising GB News. And Wootton has been sacked by the Mail Online. He had been suspended by them due to accusations. People are using this as a reason to shut down GB News, yet the BBC wasn't shut down over the Jimmy Savile scandal. I think there is a massive overreaction to Fox's comments. I don't like him, and I don't like Ava. There may be a video soon about Laurence, a video on women's issues, and a video about men's issues at some point.